Well, good morning, church. You know what I find remarkably interesting? Doctor's visits. Any of you guys ever been to a doctor's visit? Some of you, that's how you know what day of the week it is. Those are not my words, those are your own words. I've been to the doctor before, like for an annual checkup. I mean, it's been about 5 or 6 years since I've done that, but I've gone to my primary care physician before for an annual checkup, and you do your normal test, right? Here's your blood sugar test, here's your blood pressure test, here's your Rorschach test, here's all the random things that they do. And I'm still remarkably young, right? I'm 32 years old, as healthy as an overweight horse. And I always enjoy what my doctor would have to say to me at the end of our visit. He'd sit down with me with his clipboard with all my test results, and he'd say, well, your blood work has come back. It's immaculate. Your blood pressure test has come back. It's immaculate. Your blood sugar test has come back. It's immaculate. Your weight test has come back. You could lose a few pounds, Greg. Now, what happens when you go to the doctor and it's just a checkup, right? Nothing's really wrong with you. You're just going because you're supposed to. What happens when your doctor offers unsolicited advice about your lifestyle, right? When they're like, you could stand to lose a few pounds. Or when they say, like, your blood sugar is a little high. Maybe you should cut back on the sweets or cut back on the butter. What's your reaction? Honest reaction. Of course, you tell the doctor to your face, like, oh, yes, I respect your opinion, and I will absolutely make these changes. Do you? No. I'll be fine. There's nothing wrong. I've been healthy. I've been overweight my whole life. It's going to be fine. I'll get a second opinion if I really need to, right? You're not really that invested and that interested, so you're probably not going to make any significant lifestyle changes based on what they say. If there's any physicians here in the room, I'm deeply sorry. But you probably already knew this about your patients. Now, I want to flip the script, right? What if you go to the doctor and you're expecting them to give you advice on how to fix something, right? I don't know how you guys handle being sick, but I am a tremendous baby. If I get the flu, I am straight up toast. Thank the Lord that I have not had the flu since being the pastor of this church, because we'd have to shut the whole thing down for like 2 weeks. I just can't do it. So, even if I've got bad seasonal allergies, I'll show up to the doctor and I'm like, I'll do anything if you can fix this. Literally, do you want me to climb on my hands and knees over to the other side of the room? I mean, we got to talk about my physical limitations here. I can't go far. I am overweight after all. But if you're expecting them, right, if it's actually like serious, if it's potentially life-threatening, that's when we'll actually make the really big changes, right? If it's small stuff, if it's just the warning, the preventative maintenance, the checkups, it's all right. But when it comes to do or die, change this or face the consequences, that's when we get really serious about it. So we're beginning a brand new series today, a brand new sermon series called All In. And we're going to be going through the book of James over the next several weeks. And if you have not guessed what this series All In is about, it's about letting your life fully reflect being a follower of Jesus and not just partially. It's about making sure that Jesus is the Lord of every single corner of your life and not just on Sunday mornings, not just a few places. And today we begin in James chapter 1. Now, before we really dig into the passage, I want to give you a little context about the letter of James. James is the half-brother of Jesus, and James is the leader of the church in Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is the main holy city in Israel. It's the capital. James leads the church there, and James writes a letter. Now, what's unique about this letter is that it's not like Paul's letters, where it's addressed to a specific person, or where it's addressed to a specific geographic location, like to the churches in this particular area. Rather, James's letter is addressed to all Jewish Christians who live outside of Israel. At this point, you've got the nation of Israel. Not every single Jew who follows Judaism lives in Israel. Some live in neighboring nations. Some live hundreds and hundreds of miles away. And news of Jesus has begun to spread beyond just Jerusalem and Judea and Israel. And some of these people who formerly were Jews have become Christians. They've become converts. They've accepted Jesus as the Messiah based on the word that they've heard. Now, James hears about these Christians who were living abroad in a non-Jewish, non-religious country like Israel. They are living in pagan nations that have different practices, that have different governments, that have different beliefs. And you know what James notices? He actually gives a hint of it here in this passage whenever he says at the very beginning, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Get rid of all moral filth, all evil." Do you know what he's talking about? He notices, he hears about these people who were living abroad whose lives, whose actions are not reflecting the one whom they claim to follow. He hears about these people who call themselves Christians and yet will gossip about and slander their neighbors. He hears about these people who call themselves Christians and yet show favoritism towards people who are rich and can benefit them and do things for them instead of showing love indiscriminately. He hears about these people who call themselves Christians and yet are as greedy and as selfish and as prideful as imaginable. And James sees an issue with this. So he writes this letter to encourage them to not only hear the word, but to be doers of the word. Now, the word that he's talking about is the gospel message, and James asserts, and I'm going to tell you too, that the gospel message, our Christian faith, is not just merely head knowledge. It's not like you're studying for an exam that you're going to take at the end of your life where God gives you a multiple choice test and you have to pass it in order to get into heaven. It's not just head knowledge, and it's also not just an internal feeling. It's not just warm, fuzzy, feel good. The Christian message, the gospel, is about a transformed life. So James writes to these Christians, he says, you guys have heard the gospel, it's been brought to you, you've accepted it, and yet there's a disjointment, there's a disjointing between what you've received and what you're actually living, what you claim to profess and how you're actually walking, the one who you say you follow and the way that you actually live. Those things don't line up, he says. So if you're going to be a true Christian, if you're going to be a true follower, you have to not only hear the word, you have to not only know the word, you have to do the word. You have to live it. You have to put it into practice. And this is not a brand new teaching. This is not unique to James. In fact, Jesus himself said the exact same thing. If you got your Bibles and you go back to the Gospel of Matthew, over the last several months, we've been in the Gospel of Matthew in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. At the end of that, in Matthew chapter 7, this is the very end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is preaching to his disciples. He's teaching them all about what it means to follow him, all about what it means to live into the kingdom values here in this world. And at the very end of it, you have this climactic moment. Now, mind you, Sermon on the Mount is not easy teaching. If you're ever looking to be convicted, I would highly encourage you to read Matthew chapters 5 through 7. So at the end of Matthew chapter 7, listen to what he says. This is verses 24 through 27. This is how he leaves his disciples. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the wind blew and beat against that house, and yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the wind blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. Do you know what he's saying? For those who put his words into practice, they're building their life on a solid foundation. But for those who do not put his words into practice, those who hear it but do not do it, those who receive it but do not live it, guess what happens? Not nothing. It's not a neutral result. Catastrophe happens. Eventually the storms of life show up, and guess what? Because the foundation was shaky, because it wasn't actually built on Jesus' teaching, everything falls with a great crash. It's a complete and utter disaster and catastrophe. So for those who hear the word, and I'm going to really make you uncomfortable. You have all heard the word. You know about the name of Jesus. You know the salvation he brings. You know the transformed life he calls you to, not just in heaven, but here in this world too, and in this life too. You know it. But if we don't do it, it leads to great disaster. And there's a few ways that I think this disaster shows up. And if you're okay with it, I'll give you a few of these examples. Actually, even if you're not okay with it, I'm going to give you these examples. First of all, if you are a hearer of the word, but not a doer of the word, if you listen to what Jesus has to say, if you sit in church, if you know what the gospel teaches and what it says, and yet you do not make changes in your life, you do not put it into practice, you do not do it, the number one damage that gets done is to other people's faith. Let me explain. Did you know that there's a lot of different words that we use in church that don't get used really anywhere else in people's everyday lives, that never really show up? There's words that we use in church that no other people outside of church use, and some people don't even know. Give you an example. Acolyte. How many of you know what an acolyte is? Show of hands. Just kidding. You don't have to raise your hands. That's not a word that you see anywhere else outside of church. But do you know what a word is that everybody knows, especially people outside of church? Hypocrite. What's a hypocrite, friends? A hypocrite is someone who says one thing and then does another. This would be like me preaching a message about health and wellness while maintaining the physique of the Pillsbury Doughboy, right? You would look at me and say, why should I believe anything you have to say when you're not living it yourself? So many people outside of church who are not Christians find Christians to be the number one reason why they do not believe in the faith and do not come to church. Let me just let that soak in for a second. The number one reason non-believers don't believe is because they look at the lives of self-avowed Christians and say those guys are hypocrites. They don't live what they say. That's the number one reason. They can look at the message of the gospel and get on board with that. They can look at the fellowship and the gathered worship service and say, I can get on board with that and I can participate in that. But as soon as they start to look at the lives of the people who call themselves Christians, that's where they draw the line and say, no, I don't want to be like them. Never mind. It's like the example of someone who's a salesman, right? If you've got someone who's trying to sell you something and yet they're not willing to use it themselves, they're not willing to buy it themselves, how likely are you to buy that from them? Put another way, I drive an F-150. I love my F-150. Granted, what I had before the F-150 was a Tesla, so you could only go up from there. It's East Texas, I can say that. I love my F-150, but if I were to sit down to dinner with the CEO of Ford, whoever it is, and he rolls up to my house in a Chevy, you think I'm ever going to buy a Ford again? What does that guy know that I don't that prevents him from actually using and driving a Ford? So the number one reason or the number one damage that being a hearer of the word and not a doer, the number one damage is to the faith of other people because of the witness that it doesn't give, the negative witness that it provides. Second, when you are a hearer of the word and not a doer, it does damage to your own life. I'm about to blow your minds with a fun fact that you can impress your friends with that you may not have known. Did you know that all throughout the gospel, really all throughout the Bible, no matter what page you flip to, no matter what sentence you read, Jesus, and by virtue God, never says a single thing that is intended to harm you or intended to be bad for you? Did you know that? Every single thing Jesus directs, every single thing Jesus says is to orient you towards the best possible life. It's to bring the best possible good for you. Jesus does not want your harm. Jesus does not want you to fail. Jesus does not want you to fall. All he desires is for us to be lifted up and to live into the greatest possible life. Did you know that? Here's what's amazing is people know that and they still don't do what he says. Do you know what that results in? Us perpetuating and staying in these negative patterns of behavior that harm our own lives and that harm our relationships. Oh, I know that Jesus said not to indulge in excess, but you know what? It's Friday night. I don't have to work tomorrow. It's going to be fine. And then you wake up on Sunday. I enjoyed the nervous laughter as if some of you guys were like, it couldn't be me. When we don't listen to what Jesus has to say, when we think that we know better than him, we find out through our own lives, through our own experiences, how wrong we are, and yet we continue to do it. Jesus says, you need to forgive other people even though they continue to wrong you. But we say, no, I'd rather continue to hold on to grudges and continue to hold on to anger. Then you start going bald in your 20s, and then you wonder why. You start grinding your teeth in your sleep. You start falling apart because the human body is not meant to hold on to that anger and that kind of grudge. Third, this is the most powerful one. Yeah, being a hearer of the word and not a doer of the word, it does damage to other people's faith. Yeah, it does damage to our own lives. Do you know what it really, really, really does damage to? Our relationship with Jesus himself. Do you know that if you accept his death and say, I know Jesus died for me, I accept his death for me that covers my sins, I accept it, I believe it so that I can go and live with him in everlasting eternal life. I accept his death. Oh, but his life? What he commands, what he teaches about how we're supposed to live? No, I don't accept that. No, I don't want that. Do you know that when we accept his death but refuse to accept his life, we cheapen his sacrifice for us? I want you to imagine for a second if you've got a parent, right? Now, this is a fictitious story. This is just a made-up example, but one that can illustrate the point. If you've got a parent who you really don't agree with, they try to teach you and impart wisdom, and you just never really listen. You go do your own thing. They try to talk to you about the best possible way to live, how to be able to not waste your life, how to be able to be productive, but it's not really the route you want to go. I mean, you listen to it. You have to. They're your parent, but you don't actually do it, and you know you're not going to. You never really respect them. You never really listen to them. You never really take their advice. You never really want your life to look like theirs. Then eventually they end up dying. Boom, there's a massive inheritance that you're in, that's coming to you. If you were to show up and just say, I'll take what's mine, I accept their death, I accept their inheritance because I know that this is what I'm due. They're my parents, they're my dad, my mom. They're the people that I belong to. I'll accept what is rightfully mine. And yet all throughout your life, you were never really willing to claim them as your parent whose responsibility it is to form you, to teach you, to shape you, to show you the right ways to go in your life. Is that any kind of relationship? No, it's not relationship. If we take that same plot and put it into a Hallmark or a Lifetime movie, that's the bad guy. You're the villain of the story. Same thing with Jesus. If you say, yes, I'll accept Jesus' death, by all means, Lord, thank you for dying on that cross, but your advice on how to handle my relationships, your advice on how I'm supposed to handle difficult situations, I think I can leave it. That does damage to our relationship with Jesus. Now, here's the good news. Here's the good news. I think that I've got the solution. The solution is not just to try harder, right? This would be the most depressing sermon if I were like, you bunch of sinners, you don't actually do the word, now get out there and try harder, go do more. You'd be like, well, if I could, I would, right? Here's the thing that I really believe and think, and what I'm excited to share with you. Action is predicated on belief. It's not about trying harder. It's about whether or not you truly believe what you're doing makes a difference. Let me give you a couple of examples, right? Let me give you a couple of examples, and then I'll say my main point again so that you can, when you tweet it, you can make sure you capture it accurately. Example for you. Let's take a high school kid who comes from a really poor background, right? Not a very economically advantaged family. Let's say that he's probably not the smartest, probably doesn't have the most sterling personality, probably isn't super involved in social clubs and activities. This kid is probably not going to be able to go to college based on any sort of academic or social scholarship, but he can get in through an athletic scholarship. If you take this kid who believes that by working out and getting good at football, he is going to be able to forge a new life for himself by getting into school on an athletic scholarship and have opportunities he would never have before, what do you think that kid's day-to-day life is going to look like? Sitting on the couch eating Doritos? No, that's my life, and I'm not getting an athletic scholarship anywhere. What's that kid's life going to look like? He's going to be in the weight room every single day. He's going to be practicing as much as he possibly can. Do you agree, church? Do you think so? If he genuinely believes that that is going to lead to him having a changed life, you better believe he's going to do it. How about another example? Ladies. Well, it could maybe apply to some men too, but mostly ladies. Skincare routines. Who's got a skincare routine? Now, why is it that women rub all of these potions and goos and all sorts of things on their faces? So that they can look young and live forever, right? And they genuinely believe it every day, multiple times a day. There are people who are rubbing snail mucus all over their face. The actual word is snail mucin, but I'm not sure what mucin is, so I assumed it was a scientific word for mucus. Why would anyone do that? Because they genuinely believe it's going to be an anti-aging agent. And when they get into their 90s and low hundreds, they won't have any wrinkles because the snail mucus is frozen their face. The dedication, the belief is there. One more example. I've been practicing the acoustic guitar for a couple of years. I've been practicing guitar for a couple of years, 3 years actually. And I'm still not that good at it. But do you know why I'm not that good at it? Because my ability to make money is not dependent on my playing of the acoustic guitar. Because I'm not working towards auditioning to tour with the Trans-Siberian Orchestra. So whenever I pick up my acoustic guitar, it's because I think to myself, oh, it'd be fun to kind of strum a couple of chords, maybe play a couple of notes, maybe be able to play Don't Stop Believing by Journey. But ultimately, playing guitar is not going to change my life. It's not going to make any massive difference for me, which is why even 3 years later, I'm still not that good. Because there are some days where I'll pick it up, strum it for 15 minutes. Then there are entire stretches of weeks at a time where I don't even touch it. Because I know that it's not going to make any significant impact on my life one way or another. Now, flip the script. If the Lord himself were to appear right here and say, Greg Morgan, I say in front of this entire church, if you can learn how to play You're the Inspiration by Chicago on the acoustic guitar, I will give you a beautiful wife immediately. What do you think that my day-to-day activities are going to look like? I'll forsake all of you, and I will be practicing those notes and those chords constantly. Bonus points if she's rich and I can retire early. Your beliefs are what shape your actions. If you have a true and sincere belief that something is going to dramatically have an impact in your life, then your action is going to naturally follow. Do you know what happens if we truly and genuinely believe that the gospel message is actually going to transform our lives? The actions naturally follow. And let me explain how this is played out and how it actually shows up, okay? I told you that when we're hearers of the word and not doers, it has a negative impact on other people around us and their faith. Guess what happens whenever we are hearers and doers of the word? It attracts other people. Even people who will not admit it. Everyone wants to be around someone who lives in humility rather than pride. Everyone wants to be around someone who lives generously rather than stingy. Everyone wants to be around someone who in the most stressful of situations is filled with peace and calm instead of anxiety and nervousness. Everyone is drawn to someone who lifts others up instead of tears them down. Why are we drawn to that type of person? Because we want to be like that type of person. So if we who are close to Jesus live like that, others will naturally want to be around us, and then we'll be able to see how Jesus can bring transformation into their lives as much as ours. Second, I told you about how not following Jesus leads to negative things happening in our lives because we have a tendency to follow negative patterns. But guess what happens when we're not only hearers but also doers of the word? You guessed it, we become new. We become changed. Our lives become better. Rather than experiencing the same old, because we said, I believe in Jesus. I've given my life over to you, Lord. I mean, I'm not going to make any changes, but I've done it. I'm born again. I look the same, but I'm born again. When we actually make changes, we see the real change and transformation that Jesus brings. When we let go of the things that we're addicted to, when we let go of the things that have held our lives in chains, then we begin to experience freedom. Then we begin to experience true joy that persists no matter what's going on around us. And the last thing I said, when we're hearers of the word and not doers, it damages our relationship with Jesus. Do you know what happens when we both hear the word and do the word? It strengthens our relationship with Christ in the most incredible way, because it teaches us to lean on him, to trust him more and more. Because when we listen to Christ, even though it may be something we don't want to do, when we trust Jesus, even when it's something that may not make sense to us or is really difficult, and we see what he can do through it, it teaches us to rely on him more. I want you to think through, if I were to hire a financial advisor, if I were to call a financial advisor and say, I got $6 in my savings account, I'm ready to invest in the stock market. If that financial advisor is making suggestions to me, well, I think you should put it here. I think you should do this with it. And I'm saying, no. Am I ever going to trust anything that financial advisor says? No, because they never had the opportunity to be proven right. But if I listen to him, if he says, Greg, you need to put this here, you need to do this with that $6, and it works out, I see a return, guess what I'm going to start to do with that financial advisor? I'm going to begin to trust him more. And when he tells me riskier things to do, I'm going to trust him more because I've seen the results of what he's told me previously. When he tells me things I don't want to hear, I'm going to trust him more because I've seen what he's able to do. Friends, when we are doers of the word, when we so fervently believe that our lives are spurred to action, that's when we see Jesus more vividly than ever before. So I'm wrapping up now. I'm finishing now. I'm finishing here. How are you doing with being a doer of the word? Are you one of these people who sits and you hear and you know, but your life doesn't reflect it? Are you someone who you know what you're supposed to live like, but you just can't seem to find the way to follow through? You just can't seem to motivate yourself to do it. You got a Bible, you don't read it. You know you're supposed to pray, you don't do it. I got news for you, friends. It's not that you're too busy. Time's not the issue. It's not a skill issue. You're not too dumb to do it. It's a heart issue, in that your heart is not fully in it. You know in your mind Jesus brings salvation, but you don't believe in your heart that faithfully following Jesus will genuinely change your life. So here's what I want you to do this week. Every day this week, remind yourself, rekindle your faith, and remind yourself of why you decided to follow Jesus. What is it in your life that initially called you or brought you to say, Lord, I need you so that you can have this difference in me? Keep that in front of you every single day. And I guarantee you, you'll see that when your heart is in the right place, the actions will always quickly follow. Amen and amen.